PhD and a teacher at Sequoia Pathfinder Academy in Eastmark, which is in Mesa, Arizona. And I'm going to be talking about a project I did with my students where we used 3D printed artifacts and integrated with STEM, built a museum together. I'm starting off with this image, this silhouette of the Brooklyn Bridge as kind of a way to frame project-based learning. Think of it as an intertwining of different tools that you encounter throughout your educational career to build a complex learning environment that really mirrors authenticity. And for this project, it was scaffolded on science and history. The student project involved building a museum. The students took an empty virtual museum and filled it with artifacts and exhibits highlighting U.S. history from pre-1600 to 1870. Basically, the project was centered on the East Coast. That's where most of the artifacts came from. The guiding problem, the design a display that integrates history and science, connecting an artifact within the museum. The goals, each student must complete an experiment based on an artifact, display based on the research of history of the artifact, and create a researched first-person narrative about the artifact. I think somebody's microphone's on. It's creating some static. The museum targeted opening was February 13th, 2020, and they did it. This is their story, so I wanted to focus on what the students did. It was a holistic project that integrated STEM and history into a unified experience. There were more than 45 digital historical 3D printed artifacts that were selected based on appearance, historical context, and researchability, and they're organized into 6 themed galleries highlighting historical periods and experiences. One of them included the galleries They Sought Freedom, which was entirely about struggles of slavery and what it was like being enslaved. The STEM inquiry-based project was focused on experimental design, and we used the Jamestown Rediscovery Project, which includes an extensive online artifact database, which you can see in the pictures. And using this database, the students identified the materials they used to make the artifacts. They then designed experiments testing the diagenesis of the artifacts. And diagenesis are the physical and chemical events that happen to things once they're buried. And you can see from this thinking map, they identified pottery, wood, iron, bone, copper, glass, stone, things of that sort. And I had samples of each that they could experiment with. For the next 9 weeks, they observed and measured changes in the materials. You can see somebody holding a piece of copper in the center. The chart on the right-hand side of the screen shows the effect of salt, acid, soil, and plant material on bone. They reported the results as part of their display, and it is a little inaccurate. This is a 5th grade group, and they've never done anything like this before. Historical inquiry, the artifacts, and was based on artifacts and historical empathy. While they tested the materials, they researched the history of the artifact, and most of the artifacts were downloaded from a place called the Virtual Curation Laboratory. They have thousands of scanned artifacts, and they're all available online through a website called Sketchfab. And you can see some of them on the right-hand side. This is an example of one of the artifacts. The original cup is on the left, and the 3D printed version is on the right. And it's a Civil War artifact from a site called Camp Misery. The original artifact was so crumbly that it probably no longer exists anymore. So 3D printing is one of the ways to preserve artifacts, in both historically and physically in a lot of ways, and also protects existing artifacts from damage through handling. So you can drop a 3D printed artifact, but you can't really drop a real one. Haptic learning experiences result from interaction with the artifacts, connecting people to the past. So haptic means that they're tangible or touchable or holdable. So they can actually experiment and measure from these artifacts, even though they're not the originals. This is kind of neat. It's a Roman oil lamp, 3,000-year-old oil lamp that was found at Jamestown in Virginia, a site that's around 400 or 500 years old. Inquiry focused on historical empathy, which facilitated student interaction and interpretation of the lives of the people tied to the artifact. One thing that a couple of the artifacts in this picture I'd like to point out. The one in the upper right-hand corner is a small version of a slave auction block that is sitting on a corner in Fredericksburg, Virginia. The one in the lower left-hand corner is, those are George Washington's teeth. The one in the center is a dog jaw from Jamestown with cut marks on it from a period in time in Jamestown called the Starving Time. And then the pig and the cow are artifacts from a freedman's cabin, which is a house that was owned by somebody who was enslaved that had been freed. Historical empathy uses 5 stances that kind of scaffold on each other. So each stance represents a deeper level of interconnection with the people of the past. Empathy develops as the student discovers more about the life of the historic person. So here's an example. These are the actual artifact, and the 3D printed version is down below. As the students do research on the artifacts, they would discover that it's not just an ordinary old pair of children's shoes, but it belonged to an agricultural family. The father fought on the Confederate side of the Civil War to protect their way of life. The shoes were created by an enslaved craftsman, and they're from North Carolina in 1862. And considering current events especially, you can see how this history is still playing out. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is an example of a first-person narrative based on George Washington's teeth. He made me do it. Yes, I got some money, but at what cost? I feel less than human. My life is terrible. As a Negro, this was horrendous. George Washington pulled out the teeth of innocent people, including my teeth, for his own. What a selfish man, even though I and other people were slaves, and that is unacceptable. So you can kind of see how, based on this, how empathy was developing with these 5th grade students through interaction with the artifact and through the first person narrative. Once they did the research about the artifact, they started to connect it more with real people. And this is something that just doesn't happen with a textbook. On opening day, the students created their displays. Each display included science, history, an artifact, and the first-person narrative. I used a particular kind of research method called Q methodology to study the impact of this event on the students. It uses factor analysis on a group of participants and the ranking of a set of self-referenced qualitative statements. Another way to look at it is, and why it's called Q methodology, it's the quantitative study of qualitative statements. It's also the scientific comparison of subjectivity. For this project, there were 33 statements. Statements were organized into 2 groups, historical empathy and holistic learning. These were further categorized into overlapping subgroups. Here are a couple examples of some of the statements. I think textbooks provide an accurate account of history. I learn more from the past from what I am told, or I understand how diagenesis both destroys and protects the artifacts. There were 2 pre-sorts. There were 2 sorts, or to start the project, there was a pre-sort on December 9th and a post-sort on February 18th. So kind of bracketed the event, and this allowed me to test the results. The way the sorting process works is the students will get all 33 statements, and then they sort them into piles of agree, neutral, and disagree. Then they sort them again on a sorting table. Sorting the extremes first is things they agree the most with and disagree the most with, and then they fill in the middle. On the back of each statement is a number, and they record that on the sorting table. Here's an actual sorting table with the sort created by the student. And after they've written the statements down, What we're looking for is a shift in the placement of a statement. So let's say the statement starts here where this yellow pound sign is, and the first sort, and then the post sort, it might end up moving all the way to the other side of the table. So you can see this statement would move from disagreement to agreement. And this is where we collect our data. Here's an example of finished results of 3 statements. These all involve diagenesis, which is, again, the effect of depositional changes on an artifact over time. The blue lines indicate the pre-sort, and the red lines indicate the post-sort results. And you can see, especially with statements 2 and 19, there were major changes in the opinions about these statements, indicating that learning took place and that the effect of the event, how it had an impact on the students. The results show that over 90% of participants have benefited from the holistic student-driven learning experience. 73% of the students favored the use of 3D printed historical artifacts to connect with people of history. And 90% of the students experienced notable connection to history through the inquiry and through historical empathy. I guess I kept it short, so that's me, and I'm happy to entertain any questions. I have some examples of the artifacts if you're curious. So thank you very much. Oh, some of the resources I've shared for your backpack include a complete list of all the artifacts, and also a research paper about this article. Are there any questions?
Yeah. Jennifer, Al, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Jennifer asked, methodology question, why do the physical sort?
The physical sort, I find one of the biggest benefits from that is they actually had to read the statements and develop the statements, develop opinions about the statements by reading them 3 or 4 times. So I felt that interaction reduced the amount of bias, or it also eliminated the possibility of other students influencing their results. So the physical sort, to me, produced pretty valid results. Interestingly enough, it also works pretty well as a group summative assessment.
I can see that. Al, can you show everybody some of the artifacts that you guys have made so far?
Sure. Can everybody see me? I can't really see what the screens looks like. This is one of the artifacts. It's a brick from Gunston Hall, which was George Mason's residence. He's one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And these finger impressions were left behind by an enslaved person who made the brick. And the students really resonated with the irony of that somebody who signed the Declaration of Independence actually had enslaved people. And it's the full-size brick. For the students, I had a 1/8 size brick. This was printed by me, for me, by the Virtual Curation Laboratory. They sent it to me. This one is a window from a shipwreck, from a ship called Betsy, which was sunk during the American Revolution. It was a British ship that was sunk in the Yorktown River to create a blockade to prevent the French from sailing upriver to assist the Americans, the revolutionaries. This one's kind of fun. I don't know if everybody can see this, but it's a key that was found in Edgar Allan Poe's pocket after he died. And for Halloween, we had one key printed for each student. And they had to kind of solve a mystery in order to figure out what the key was for and about. And here's, in the cup I talked about, in the talk, I mentioned this cup from the Battle of Fredericksburg. So this is what it would look like. And I've talked to a couple people that know more about the cup, and one of them is pretty sure that the cup disintegrated in the collections. It was just crumbled away to rust and dust. So this is all that remains. This is something that I printed a while ago. It's a shackle that was used on the ankle of an enslaved person. And when I first showed this to students, they're putting their hands inside it. And so they really got to feel what it would be like to be treated in such a way. So this had a big impact on students. Here's the Roman oil lamp that I mentioned before. One of the neat things I think about 3D printing is it presents a scale. So when you're just looking at a picture of something, you don't really get a feel for how large it is or how small it is. But when you print something at its actual size, then you get a better idea for what the real artifact is like. And you can manipulate it and measure it. So that's just a few of the artifacts that we worked with. It was a great project. I can't wait to try it again with students. I'm looking in the chat. Let's see. Also curious, Jennifer, you say also curious how students did the science analysis on 3D printed objects. They could measure them. Most of the science came from the diagenesis project, but a few students chose to create science projects based on their artifacts. One was a spinner toy that was recovered from Boston during the Revolutionary War. It had a child's name etched on it, and the student who had this artifact decided to learn about how spinners worked, so he created his own spinners and modeled it after the historical artifact. But the original artifact was also made out of lead, so that had that science aspect that they could explore as well. So what was wrong with making a toy out of lead that was about the size of something that could fit in your mouth? So we know better now. They didn't know back then that would be a problem. Any other questions? Thank you for the kind comments about, yeah, it was an incredible experience with students. I had 3 3D printers running for about 5-6 weeks in my classroom, and every time a new artifact came off, they got more excited about it. Let's see, any other questions?
It's super cool and exciting. I unmuted myself. I guess I was confused because I thought that the students were doing the diagenesis, that they were looking at how the materials decomposed, and so I was curious how you did that with a 3D printed object. But
no, we had the actual materials to simulate what the materials would be like at Jamestown. So we had real bone, real wood, real iron that the students buried and would unbury to check, and then they'd rebury. I know that's not ideal, but it was also I really pushed the students. I believe that if you believe the students can do something and they believe it as well, then they'll do it. And they'd never made displays like this before. They'd never had a chance to do experimental design in the same way before. So it was all new to them, just like it was all pretty much new to me at this. So that was a huge deal for this project.
I had a technical question. You had these cups which you would 3D print them.
Yes.
How would you take a scan before and then make a CAD model and then 3D print?
I did not scan them, but I'm familiar with the scanning process. Basically, they just have a camera that hooks up to a computer, and then they use a program, which is a free program called Blender, which takes basically it's a series of still images, and it blends them together into the three-dimensional object. So they're not using CAD to do it.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have used objects that were a result of ultrasound. So those Basically, it's the same thing. You're just scanning an object, but you're using ultrasound to do it. And then again, they would use Blender to make the objects. And I could be wrong about the name of the program because I haven't used it, but I think it is called Blender. Any other questions?
I don't see any more in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you, Al, for all that. That was
Sure.
fantastic.
It was fun.